Chapter 3 of Living Alone by Stella Benson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Everlasting Boy. Mitten Island is a place of fine weather. Its air is always like stained glass between you and perfection. Always you will find in the happy ways of Mitten Island a confidence that the worst is left behind, and that even the worst was not so very bad. You can afford to remember the winter, for even the winter was beautiful. You can smile in the sun and think of the grey flush that used to overspread the island under its urgent crises of snow, and it seems that always there was joy running quickly behind the storms, joy looking with the sun through a tall window in a cloud. Even the most dreadful curtain of a winter's day was always drawn up at sunset. Its straight edge rose slowly, disclosing flaming space, and the dramatic figures of the two island churches, exulting and undying martyrs in the midst of flames. It is a place of fine weather, and this is a book of fine weather, a book written in spring. I will not remember the winter and the rain. It was the spring that brought Sarah Brown to Mitten Island, and the spring that first showed her magic. It was the spring that awoke her on her first morning in the house of living alone. She awoke because it was so beautiful outside, and because there was a beautiful day coming. You could see the day secretly making preparations behind a shining mist. She heard a sound of breathless singing, and the whipping of stirred grass in the garden, the sound of someone unbearably happy, dancing. Now, there is hardly anything but magic abroad before 7 o'clock in the morning. Only the disciples of magic like getting their feet wet and being furiously happy on an empty stomach. Sarah Brown went to her window. The newborn trembling slants of smoke went up from the houses of the island. There was a sky of that quiet design which suffices half a day unchanged. A garden of quite a good many yards lay behind the house. It contained no potatoes or anything useful, only long, very green grass, and a may-tree, and a witch dancing. The extraordinary music to which she was dancing was partly the braying of a neighbouring donkey, and partly her own erratic singing. She danced, as you may imagine, in a very far from grown-up way, rather like a baby that has thought of a new funny way of annoying its nana. And she sang, too, like a child that inadvertently bursts into loud, tuneless song because it is morning and yet too early to get up. A little wandering of the voice, a little wandering of the feet. The may-tree in the middle of the garden seemed to be her partner. A small blot moved up and down the checkered trunk of the tree, and that was the shadow of a grey squirrel watching the dancing. The squirrel wore the same fur as the 2.5-guinea young lady wears, and sometimes it looked with a tilted head at the witch, and sometimes it buried its face in its hands and sat for a while shaken with secret laughter. There was certainly something more funny than beautiful about the witch's dancing. She laughed herself most of the time. She was wearing a mackintosh, which was in itself rather funny, but her feet were bare. A voice broke in. "Good for you, Cully." It was Sarah Brown's fellow lodger, leaning from her window. The squirrel rippled higher up the may-tree. The pleasure of the thing broke like an eggshell. Sarah Brown turned back towards her bed. It was too early to get up. It was too late to go to sleep again. Eunice, her hot water bottle, she knew, lay cold as a serpent to shock her feet if she returned. Besides, the dog David was asleep on the middle of the counterpane, and she was too good a mother to wake him. There are a good many things to do when you find yourself awake too early. It is said that some people sit up and darn their stockings, but I refer now to ordinary people, not to angels. Utterly resourceless people find themselves reduced to reading the penny stamps on yesterday's letters. There is a good deal of food for thought on a penny stamp, but nothing really uplifting. Some people I know employ this morning leisure in scrubbing their consciences clean, thus thriftily making room for the sins of the coming day. But Sarah Brown's conscience was dreadfully receptive, almost magnetic. Little sins like smuts lay always deep upon it. There were a few regrettable seconds in every minute she lived, I think, though she never enjoyed the compensations attached to a really considerable sin. Anyway, her conscience would have been a case for pumice stone, and when she was happy she always tried to forget it. Yet, she was not without a good many very small and unessential resources for sleepless moments. Often she wrote vague comments on matters with which she was not familiar, in an exercise book, always eventually mislaid. She would awake from dear and unspeakable dreams full of hope, and tell herself stories about herself, trying on various lives and deaths like clothes. The result was never likely enough even to laugh at. Today, she had watched Magic dancing in a mackintosh, and she was at a loss. There was a knock upon her door, and a voice. "Hi, Cocky, could you oblige me with a loan of a few halfpence for the milkman? I haven't a bean in my purse." "Nor have I," said Sarah Brown, opening the door. "But I can pawn—" "Oh, come off it, Cuthbert," said the fellow lodger. "This is a respectable house, more or less, and you ain't going out to pawn nothing in your pyjams. I'll owe it to the milkman again. Not but what I hadn't perhaps better pay him after all. I got me money paid yesterday, only I had thought to put it away for Albert." "Are you Peony, the other lodger?" "That's right, dearie." Peony was not in her first youth. In fact, she was comfortably into her second. Her voice was so beautiful that it almost made one shy, but her choice of language, tending as it did in the other direction, reassured one. She had fine eyes of an absolute grey, and dark hair parted in the middle, and drawn down so as to make a triangle of a face which, left to itself, would have been square. Her teeth spoilt her. The gaps among them looked like the front row of the stalls during the first scene of a review, or the last scene of a play by Shakespeare. On the whole, she looked like the duckling of the story, serenely conscious of a secret swanhood. She showed unnatural energy, even in repose, and lived as though she had a taxi waiting at the door. "Who's Albert?" asked Sarah Brown, and then wished she had not asked, for even without Peony's flush she should have guessed. "Half a mo, kiddie, till I get rid of the milkman. Come and sit on the stairs and I'll tell you a tale. I like no end telling this tale." Harold the broomstick was desultorily sweeping the stairs. He worked harder when first conscious of being watched, but seeing that they intended to stay there, on the top step, he made this the excuse to disappear indolently, leaving little heaps of dust on several of the lower steps. "I come across Albert first when I was about 28, said Peony, when Sarah Brown, in rather a loud dressing-gown, had taken her seat on the stairs beside her. "Albert was the ideal kid, and me, nothing to speak of. Nothing more than a lump of mud, I used to say. All my life, if you'll believe me, Cully, I've lived in mud, and kept me eye on the moon, so to say. I worked in a factory all day, making mud, as it were, for muddy Jews, and every Saturday night I took home 12 shillings worth of mud to keep myself alive in a city of mud until the Saturday after. But o' nights there was the moon, or else the stars, or else the sunset, and anyway all the air between to look at. I had a back room high up, and o' nights I used to sit and breathe there and look at the sky. Believe me, dearie, I was mad about breathing. It was me only recreation, so to say. By Gawd, it's a fair wonder how the sky and the air keeps on above the mud, and how we looks at it and breathes it and never pays no rent for it, when all's said and done. There ain't never a penny put in the slot for the moonlight, when you come to think of it, and yet it still goes on. Well, in those days I never spoke to a soul, and hated everybody, and I got very queerer nor many as is locked up in Claybury this minute. I got to thinking as how there was a debt hanging over us all. Somehow the sky seemed like a sort of upper floor to all our houses, with the stars and the moon for windows, and it seemed like there did ought to be some rent to pay, though the landlord was a real gent and never pressed for it. There might be some people who lived among flowers in the sunlight, and, so to say, rented the parlour floor, but not me. I had the upper floor, and breathed the light of the moon. As for flowers, bless you, I'd never hardly seen a flower stuck proper to the ground until a year ago. Well, dearie, I used to make believe as how we'd all get a chance, all to ourselves, to pay what we owed. Some people, I thought, runs away from the debt, and some pays it in bad money. But I says to myself, If ever my chance come, I'll pay it the very best I can. Lord, how I hated everybody in those days. It seemed like all people were rotten, and as though all the churches and all the charities were the rottenest of all the lot. Well then, dearie, Elbert blew in. You know what kids is mostly like in the Brown Borough, but Elbert, he never was. Straight legs he had, and never a chilblain nor a sore, and a small up-looking face, and yellowy hair, what you could see of it, for of course I always made him keep it nicely cropped to the pink. You never see such a clean boy, you never see him but what he seems to have sponged his collar that minute. And the little seat to his breeks always patched in the right colour and all. Yet he wasn't one of them choir boy kinds. He could have had his little game with the best of 'em, and often kicked up no end of a row when we was playing pretending games of a wet Sunday. He had one little game he loved best of all, not marbles it wasn't, nor peg tops. But there, I won't tell you what it was, for you'd laugh like the girl at the shop did when I spoke of it. I don't often get talking, but I'd had a nip of brandy at the time. Laugh fit to bust she did, having had a nip of the same herself, and asked if Elbert wasn't blind as well, and if he wore any clothes besides wings. The funny thing was that Elbert did have bad sight. It always seemed odd to me that with his weak eyes he should choose to play the little game he did. I used to take him to the heath of a summer Sunday, and he used to stand on them little ridges below the Spaniards' Road with his eyes shut against the sun, never bothering to take no aim. I can see him now, a pulling of the string of his bow. It had an eye note, like the beginning of a bit of music, and then off he'd go like a ribbit to see where the arrow fell. It was always a marvel to me he didn't put somebody's eye out, but I didn't mind. I hated everybody. He didn't live with me. He just came in and out. He never told me his name was Elbert. I just called him that, the prettiest name I knew. He never told me who his people were. I shouldn't think they could have been Brown Borough people, for Elbert seemed to have been about a lot, seen mountains and oceans and such like, and come across a lot of foreigners, even Germans. He talked a lot about people, as good as a novelette his stories was, but bloody high-flavoured. Children knows a lot in the Brown Borough. How he'd noticed the things he had with them blindish eyes of his, I don't know. I got to count on that boy no end. Fair drunk with satisfaction I used to feel. Call me a fool if you like, Cully, but it was 3 or 4 years before I got the idea that there was anything funny about Elbert. It was when it begun to look like the war had come to stop, and one couldn't look at any boy without counting up to see how long he had before the army copped him. And then I calculated that Elbert should be rising 14 now, and I saw then that he hadn't grown an inch since I first see him, nor had he changed his ways, but he still run about laughing, playing his little kiddie game, with his face to the sun. And then I remembered how often he told me things that seemed too historical for sich as him to come by honest, tales about blokes in history, and anecdotes he used to pass across about Admiral Nelson or Queen Bess. She used to make him chuckle, she did, and a chap called Shilly or Shally who was drownded. And I got struck all of an heap, to think he was some sort of an everlasting boy, and perhaps he was a devil, I thought, and perhaps I'd sold me soul without knowing it. I never took much stock of me soul, but I always had that debt of mine in my mind, and I wanted to pay it clean. For them London mists agin the sky in the spring, and for the moonlight, and for the sky just before a thunderstorm, all them things seemed to have come out of the same box like, and I didn't like feeling as how they were all just charity. However, I got this idea about Elbert, and I didn't sleep a wink that night, and couldn't enjoy me starlight. In the morning he comes as usual, with his pretty blind smile, and I says to him, "Elbert," I says, "you ain't a cruel boy, are you? You wouldn't do anything to hurt me?" Looking at him, I couldn't believe it. "Hurt you?" he says quite happily. "And why wouldn't I hurt you? I'd as lief send you to the devil as not," he says. Well, Cocky, I don't mind telling you I lost me head at that. I run away from me Elbert. Oh gosh, I been and give up me bits of sticks to a neighbour and got a place and went into service. I sneaked out one night when Elbert had gone home. I got a place up Kilburn way, an old couple, retired from the pawnbroking line. The old man had softening in his brain and said one thing all the blessed time, murmuring like a bee. The old woman never spoke, never did no work, left it all to me. She was always reading of her postcard album, shifting the cards about. She had thousands, besides one old book full of seaside comics, a beautiful collection. Well, I was dishing up the tea one night in the kitchen, and I heard a laugh, Albert's laugh, like 3 little bells, and there was Albert looking in at the window. I ran after him. There weren't nobody there. When I come back, the tripe was burnt, and I left it on the fire and run away that minute. They owed me wages, but I didn't stop for nothing. I was frightened. I got a place afterwards up in Islington. 3 old sisters, kept a fancy shop, fought with each other every minute of their lives. I hadn't been there 2 days before Albert walked in, just as laughing and loving as ever. I see then it was no use. Good or bad, he'd got me. I let him sit in my kitchen and give him some sugar bread. And one of the old cat sisters come in. "Who's this?" she says. "A young friend of mine," I says. "You're a liar," she says. "I seed from the first minute as you wasn't no respectable gal," she says, "and now perhaps my sisters'll believe me." So out I had to go, and I wasn't sorry. It seemed like there wasn't nothing in the world mattered but Albert, like as if damnation was worth while. "Oh, Albert," I says, "I'll go to the devil for you and smile all the way." He laughed and laughed. "Come on," he says, "today's an holiday." Though it wasn't, it was a Tuesday in August. "Come on," he says, "get your best hat on," and he gives me a yallow rose for me buttonhole. A year ago, come August, that was. I followed Albert at a run all up the city road, and near the Angel we took a taxi. "Tell him Euston Station," says Albert, and so I did. You know the huge top of that station, from the hill by the Angel? Well, kid, I tell you I saw a real mountain for the first time when I saw that. It was the heat mist, and a sort of pink light made a real island landscape out of it. I paid the taximan over half of all the money I had, and we went to the ticket office. "Albert," I says, "where shall we book to?" I says, like that, though I hadn't hardly a bloody oat in my purse. "Take a platform ticket," he says, and so I did. But he ran onto the platform without no ticket, and began dancing up and down among the people like a mad thing, but nobody seemed to mind him. I sat down on a seat to watch him. I thought, blimey, I thought, if I ain't under that blinking mountain now, and all these people, I says, is the little people they tell of, that lives inside hills and only comes out under the moon. I remembered that moonlight debt of mine, and I thought, I'm done with the mud now, I'm coming alive now, I says, and this'll be my chance. Presently Albert came back to me, and he was dragging a soldier by the hand. "This is a magic man," says Albert, "come back from living under the sky. Can't you feel the magic?" he says. Well, dearie, take it how you will, that's how I met my Sherry. A magic man he was, for he had my ticket taken and never seemed surprised. 10 days' leave he had, and we spent it at an inn in a village on a moor, just a mile out of sound of the sea. The moor and the sea, touching each other. Oh, Gord! The sea was like my sky at night, come near enough to know better, like. In between the moor and the sea there was the beach. It looked like a blessed boundary road between 2 countries, and it led away to where you couldn't see nothing more except a little white town, sort of built high upon a mist, more like a star. Oh, Gord! Anyway, Cuthbert, that was my chance, and that's how I come to know how my debt was going to be paid. Sherry understood all that. He was a magic man, he was. At least, he was mostly magic, but some of him wasn't nothing but a fool when all's said and done, like any other man. I couldn't have done with an all-magic bloke. Oh, he was a fool. All the things he might have been able to do, like polishing his equipment or finding his clean socks, he used forever to be asking me to do. I loved doing it. But all the things he couldn't do at all, like drawing my likeness or cutting out a blouse for me, he was forever trying to do. She spoke of Sherry as a naturalist would speak of a new animal, gradually finding out the pretty and amusing ways of the creature. I called him Sherry because that's what he called me. A French word it was, he says, meaning dearie, as it were. He was a real gent, was Sherry. I asked him once why he took up with a woman like me instead of a real young lady. He says how he'd never met before anyone who seed themselves from outside and yet was fairly honest. I know what he meant, for I was always more 2 people than 1, and I watched myself sometimes as if I was a play. I wouldn't be telling you this story else. Well, dearie, Albert was always in and out, and always hollering and a-laughing and a-playing his game. He stayed with us all them 10 days, and he come with me to Victoria to see Sherry off to France. It's Sherry's allotted money what I fetch every week. But I won't touch it. I puts it away for Albert. I don't want to owe nothing to nobody, for I'm paying such a big debt. Albert, when he comes back to me, He's going to be my payment to the world, and it's got to be good money. For Albert left me after Sherry went. He said as how he was going home, and how he would come back to me in the spring and stay with me always. It wasn't like parting, he says. Him and me could never do that. I know what he meant now." "And what about Sherry?" asked Sarah Brown. "Oh, Sherry, he never writes to me, but he promised to come back in the spring, and so he will, for there ain't no Bosh bullet that can hit a magic man." "It's springtime now," said Sarah Brown. "It's springtime now," repeated Peony. "Oh, it's wonderful. Seems like as if I was getting too much given me, so as I can never repay. But I'm keeping count, I'm not forgetting. It ain't long now before I'll pay my debt. Come the middle of May." End of chapter 3.